Hello. Oh, excuse me. I haven't spoken in so long. Um, Welcome. I started it a couple minutes early to give people a couple minutes to join. It usually takes a couple minutes to get people in. And if you plan to speak during this, you can request to be a speaker. Because I'm the host, I don't have the same UI as you guys, but you can. Where is it? There we go. Okay, you figured it out, Lone. Okay, cool. You're a speaker now. Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. All right,
Uh,
and we have someone from Sunrise who I think it's going to be Dean, their CTO. Dean, if you want to speak, you can somewhere on your UI, it should say like request to be a speaker or something. I don't have the same UI as you guys, so I'm not exactly sure what it says, but if you request that, I can add you. Hey, Heather. We have Heather, our developer community manager, here with us today. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes for people to join. If you plan on speaking, hi Alan. If you plan on speaking, just request to be a speaker, and then you can kind of like freely unmute and talk. Um, I think there might be a limit on speakers. We might have to kind of rotate, but we'll figure that out. We'll cross that bridge if we get to it. I need like the Jeopardy music to play in the intro.
oh yeah.
There's like all these funny there's all these funny soundboard things, but none of them are like music to play, um, while we're waiting for people to join. I frequently like erroneously use them, so sorry in advance if I do that again today. Hey Ben, we have our product marketing manager for Headless from Ecommerce today. Ben, welcome. Ben, if you wanna be able to speak, well, this goes for everybody. If you want to be able to speak, just request to be a speaker, and I will approve you on my end. Okay, approving Sunrise. All right, Sunrise, you're approved.
Hey there. Yeah, it is Dean from Sunrise Integration. I just wanted to make sure that you guys can hear me.
We can hear you. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. My pleasure. This is going to be very exciting.
I know, I'm excited to hear from people. We talk about Headless so much at Big Commerce. I'm really interested to kind of hear from other people and kind of like what your guys' experiences have been like so far. So I assume more people will jump in, but we can kind of just get the ball rolling now. Ben, I'll approve you as a speaker. So this is so fun. Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to have a bunch of you here. And I'm really excited that a bunch of you wanted to contribute to this conversation. I think this will be really fun. Like I said, at Big Commerce, we've been talking a lot about headless e-commerce. And I wanted to talk to kind of this larger community about your thoughts. And Lone had a great idea for this space. Like, who needs headless and who is better off without it? Like, I think there's a lot of nuance, and I would love to hear kind of what your guys' experiences have been so far and what your thoughts are. A few things to talk about just right away. If you want to speak, just be sure you're on mobile. Um, you cannot talk. Oh, hello, Philip. Philip from View Storefront is joining us. You can't talk on Twitter Spaces unless you're on mobile. If you follow me, I keep tweeting at Elon to add that feature, but still in the backlog. And everyone is welcome to chime in, even if you haven't touched base with me about it beforehand. That's totally fine. Like, if you have something to say, please jump in. And on our Big Commerce side today, we have a few of us here. We have myself, I'm Katie. I'm a senior developer advocate at Big Commerce. We have Ben Ackles, who is our product marketing manager for Headless and developer experience. And we have Heather Barr, who is our developer community manager. And I think we might have more BC people joining, but if not, that's who we've got today. And we've got a bunch of other exciting people. So I would love to kind of jump in just right away. If anyone has any thoughts to kick off just right away, like I guess the first question to ask is, who needs headless and who is better off without it? Does anyone have like thoughts to kind of get us kicked off?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. We are a digital commerce agency, so we get a lot of requests for this, right? We'll have people kind of hit us up, and so what we try to do is we try to kind of quantify their need like right out of the gate, because oftentimes people will hit us up and they've heard the term, it's kind of buzzwordy, if you would, and they'll come not necessarily even knowing what it means, just saying, hey, I want to start a new e-commerce site, and my friend says I need headless, right? Can you guys do that for me? So we have to kind of take a quick step back and say, okay, well, what are your needs? What is the size of your store? What are you selling? What kind of systems do you have? Do you have other platforms? Where are you in your business? So we really like to kind of start by doing what we call a discovery and really digging deep to find out if they really need it, or is it just, like I said, kind of a buzzword that they've heard that somebody says you quote unquote need it.
Totally. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Philip, you had your hand raised. You may speak.
Yep. Hey, hello everyone. So I'm Philip, I'm co-founder of VStorefront, and what VStorefront is basically a head for headless commerce. So we have all those wonderful APIs, but suddenly we don't have a front end. So VStorefront is this front end, and what we're observing, because we're essentially also talking about the positioning of a product like ours, is that going headless is indeed a buzzword and a huge buzzword. And I think it all started when PWAs were being promoted. It was instantly associated with headless, and headless was promoted as the ultimate solution of all the problems of the monoliths, which is obviously a lie. Like, it's just a technology to solve certain problems, and those certain problems are also generating other problems. So we see that headless is usually usable into scenarios. One of them is just when your platform is limiting you. So when you have a monolith and you want to detach your front end, it means that you're getting a completely new clean start with a completely new stack that is not associated with your e-commerce platform. So if you are limited by your e-commerce platform by any way, for example, you have a bad templating system, or you have everything in PHP and you don't have PHP developers, that's also a valid use case, then you can go headless. Another use case for that is when you want to physically detach from your e-commerce vendor, for example, because you have a very large team or you have a lot of third-party integrations, and in general, you don't want to be too tight to your e-commerce platform, because then it's becoming just a commodity, one of the many APIs that you consume, and we call this a composable commerce. And this is mostly suitable for large enterprises. Like, I really don't see many cases where headless commerce is suitable for a small shop, except the limitations I mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. By the way, hi everyone. Lone director of headless engineering here at Trellis. We're a big commerce elite partner, and we've worked on many headless projects. And I'm the guy who's supposed to sell you headless, and I'm gonna dunk on it like crazy. You should not be doing headless if I mean, if you're in any of the, I see the reactions. If you're in any of these, use cases that Philip mentioned, I totally agree with what you said, Philip. And I think then when you get into the headless world, there's definitely stages to it. Like, there's different ways to do headless. You can do headless the lightweight way, and that's fine. But I see so many brands getting into, getting enamored with the idea of going headless, and they just go into it way too soon, usually with an agency that's not really, acting in their best interest. They, and the client comes to them and they're like, hey, we've heard of this headless thing, as I don't remember the name of that person from Sunrise. If somebody can remind me here.
Dean.
Dean, all right. As Dean said, a lot of these conversations happen, with agencies where the client just comes to the agency, hey, I've heard of this headless thing, I want to do headless. Let's do headless. But then it's the agency's duty to take a step back and actually analyze the needs and say, okay, do you really need headless or not? Okay, we're gonna make less money if we build a headful, standard headful, big commerce build or whatever it might be. But it is still it is still the agency's duty to be of good advice with regards to, is it actually needed for the needs that the client's trying to meet. So we're seeing that a lot, honestly. It's just I would say 99% of merchants out there, if you look at the market as a whole, do not need headless. That is the reality that that we're seeing at Trellis, and only the 1% can really justify it. Okay, if you're doing multi-storefront, and even that you can do with BigCommerce. But if you have very complicated needs and you're addressing multiple markets and you really want flexibility with your omni-channel approach and whatnot, yeah, you can go into headless then. You're serving like, I don't know, like 20 languages, and you need a customized storefront for each of your markets, and there's many things that will justify going headless, but making the investment into a brand new detached storefront just because the technology is cool is usually where we see the mistakes happen. And I think you should outgrow Headful first before you dive into that. That's just my hot take on it.
And I think that's actually a great point that we see as well, is oftentimes a lot of clients don't really understand how powerful just the base platforms are. Like when somebody approaches us and we say, yeah, go ahead and use BigCommerce. It can do this and this and that. They're often surprised going, you mean out of the box? We're like, yeah, absolutely, right? It has all these great templates, all these great features, B2B capabilities. And oftentimes people don't even realize that you can do all of these very awesome, powerful things, and you don't need this extra customization layer. And then when we explain, well, if you do headless, you have to do all these other things, right? All this development has to be created. Everything becomes custom. They suddenly realize the power in sticking with the base platform that they might not have realized existed.
That is a conversation I have on a weekly basis, I swear. This is the story of my life, essentially. Yeah, people don't realize how powerful platforms are out of the box. And I guess all of the obligations that come with maintaining detached storefront then, and that's when going with something like Vue Storefront or Nextcommerce makes sense, right? If you want to dive into headless slowly but surely, perhaps don't start with building your own storefront unless you actually need it. That's a separate topic. But yeah, people don't realize the maintenance costs and the build costs for a project like that usually.
Yeah, I would say the maintenance is probably the next surprise that people don't understand. When they do talk about headless and they say, oh, I want to do headless, want to do headless, we remind them, well, you have to maintain it, right? It's not an out-of-the-box solution. So it's going to require updates and changes to respond to whatever the technology might be that you're using, right? That the libraries and the frameworks may get updated, or they may change, or new features come out, or API endpoints change. And so when you go in and say, hey, this is something you have to maintain on a monthly, weekly basis, all of a sudden immediately, the discussion changes to, oh, really? I didn't know that. Then the conversation goes back to, what we said before. Well, in the base platform, all of that is taken care of, and you don't have to worry about it. So these are definitely things any agency hopefully is guiding their client, doing a discovery, and really letting them know, the pros and cons of everything. And that's certainly something we try to do.
Hey, this is Kerry with Zycata. We make a site accelerator app on BigCommerce. We just want to say this has been a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much, Lone, Dean. You guys really, because from what I've seen out there, I've seen a lot of agencies steer people towards headless that shouldn't go headless for the exact reasons that you guys said. They just don't have a development team or the resources. But from an agency side of things, obviously there's a lot of dollars potential involved for you, so you're kind of going against your, let's call it, your personal gain or interest in favor of what the customer needs are. So thank you for that integrity. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with small businesses and it may not be the agency, but they're developers. They want that to work with that shiny new object, and so they push the team and go headless. But then the business owner starts to see, oh crap, this is a lot more expensive and costly to actually maintain versus going with out of like you said, the platform tools that are there out of the box or apps available.
Yeah, my hot take, and I don't know if you'll tell me if you guys agree with me, but my hot take is that retailers should not go with headless if they don't have a CTO or a VP of e-commerce who actually understands how headless works. And I know a lot of people disagree with that. And I know you can go headless without actually being in the weeds and without talking to the developers, etc. But I think it's still a mistake if your organization is not one that has a CTO or somebody who's technical in the leadership team. It's going to be most likely a disaster. Just because you're not going to understand how the system works, you're not going to understand, everything that comes with it and all the obligations that come with it, etc. And usually, yeah, I would tend to count that as a red flag. So I'd love to hear your guys' opinion. Obviously, there are some exceptions, as with everything, but
yeah, I think this is Isaiah, the CEO of Trellis. It's important to talk in perspective. So I think a lot of companies and people in general just don't realize how immature most companies are when it comes to e-commerce. So, when you think about the average e-commerce store, it's maybe doing a few $1 million. Even if they're doing $5 or $10 million, it's like their budget gets quickly eaten up on inventory and all these different factors, and there's just not a lot left over for any nice to haves, which headless might be at that point. So I think it's also important to talk about the scale of these operations and their offline and online business. And if you're a $1 billion company, it's way different than obviously if you're a $5 or $10 million business.
Yeah. So I generally think that headless is suitable almost exclusively for very, very large companies that operate with large volumes and where tiny improvements can give them bigger gains, and they generally need to scale it a little bit. But I think we even wouldn't have that conversation if the headless movement, let's call it like this, wasn't formed, and if it wasn't sold as an ultimate solution to basically any problem of the monoliths. Because as far as I remember, the biggest driver for the adoption of headless commerce at the very early days of this was basically performance. So everyone, maybe not everyone, but a lot of companies struggled with the fact that their monoliths were quite slow and they were desperately looking for a solution. And then Google came. Google came with PWAs. Google came with talking about the performance, importance of performance, Lighthouse, and PWAs were also associated with headless. So from what I've seen and from the conversations that I had, a lot of people in the industry just blindly adopted headless without even realizing how complex this technology is and how many problems actually it could introduce. They blindly adopted this. I've even heard about backend developers writing the front-end code, because this is how how it works when you have a new shiny technology. Everyone are hyped about it, but there are not so many cases on the market to actually validate if everything is true. And later, what we've seen is that we've seen a lot of Vue storefront adopters actually that after quite some time migrated back to monoliths, because what they learn is that it is not improving performance, it is just giving you a clean start. And at the same time, it is requiring you to maintain a completely new system. So I think this is also a pretty good validation of where headless fits and where headless doesn't fit.
Right. It is a false idea that PWA is headless. Yeah. I wish more people understood that, by the way. The difference between PWA and headless, they don't mean the same thing. You can have a monolith that PWA. But I think more people need to hear that.
I think it's also important to know that just because you go headless or, go in the direction of a PWA or headless, one of those directions, doesn't automatically mean you're going to have a faster site. I've seen some that have done it poorly, and now they have more infrastructure to manage, which can make it also harder to optimize for site speed. So I guess I think it can be a lot faster, obviously, if you do it well, but I'm not convinced that site speed alone is, enough to justify it, unless maybe, like you said, Philippe, you're doing insane volume, and then a slight increase in speed could be millions of dollars,
Yeah. And if you're after speed, you can put a CDN in front of your storefront, even if it's a head full storefront. just put a CDN in front of it, be mindful of the scripts you're injecting on the pages, be mindful of the amount of front-end apps that you're using. That's what's really going to make an impact. You don't need to re-platform as the first step towards speed. You don't need to re-platform to a headless storefront. It just, that is overkill, way overkill. Even if you're using a StarterKit storefront, like, Vue storefront or an Ecommerce, I still think you should be tackling the lower hanging fruits first.
Yeah, and it's important to mention that even if you will do this, like the chances that this headless build will actually improve your performance are not 100%. Really, it's hard to build well-performing single-page application. So you really need expertise. You really need people who did this before, because otherwise you will just have a clean start and you will ruin it again. So definitely, it's not a solution of this problem. It's a solution to a completely different problem. It's just a marketing it is just marketing that is saying it is.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. I think a lot of people think that headless is just this, panacea to all ills for their website, and they don't understand. It's kind of like, if you go take your car to a mechanic, if it's some kid who's never worked on an engine before, he's going to mess things up, Whereas if it's a good mechanic, they can build something that works really well. And it's the same kind of concept. Just because you go to an agency who says, yeah, we can totally make a headless integration for you, and they don't know what they're doing, it's not going to solve any of the problems that you think it's going to solve. So you have to really be careful. And going back to what we mentioned a little bit earlier, if someone internally in your company isn't able to understand what headless is or what technologies are needing to be utilized, then again, you're just going to be doubly in trouble.
I think this goes back to the topic of budget, though, where, like, yeah, you can do it wrong and you can do it right, just like everything in life. Your headless build can be amazing or it can be terrible. And one of the biggest factors is budget. And we see a lot of companies wanting to go into headless with ridiculous budgets that are never going to work realistically, that are never going to get them that neat experience that they're after. Because I think they're just not fed into, what makes a great headless build and what it really takes to bring it to life. And I will tie that back to the argument of budget, which is something that we're seeing a lot across the board. And there's a given budget below which, we just advise clients like, hey, maximize what you can get out of your current headful build, and let's think about moving to headless in a second stage. But right now, this budget is just going to get you half-baked headless experience, and I think that's even worse than than staying on your headful build currently.
Hey, I want to say thank you for making this space. This is actually a dilemma that I'm having in the company, which we have one feature that being headless will optimize the website like 100%. But yeah, I think that's my main dilemma is how many features, or what is it that makes you want to switch into headless?
I think this is Isaiah again. A lot of people, when they say feature, like a lot of times they don't actually realize we probably could do that without going headless. So they just maybe don't know how, right? So whether it's just exploring what they can do in their current platform or getting more creative with what's possible. So I look at it less around features, because generally, like, we're finding we can build most features in a non-headless way. And I look at it more as the value of headless when you start to get towards a lot of different backends that benefit from having one user experience. So from my perspective, the companies that I see that actually benefit from headless are when they have, like, let's say they have like a content engine like WordPress, or they have like a need for a CMS that's separated from, BigCommerce or another ecom platform. And then they maybe also have data coming straight from their ERP or some sort of other back office system. So now you have like 4 or 5 different sources of data that need to roll up to one user experience. That's when you start to benefit from headless the most, because you can just have one user experience on the front end. And but if you're talking about just like building a feature, I mean, it all depends on like what that feature is, right? I mean, a feature could be very small. It could obviously also be very large. So when,
Yeah, and I'll second what Isaiah said there about the multiple systems. Where we find ourselves needing it is exactly in those use cases where there's a lot of disparate systems that need to all come to unified. Sometimes we have clients who have like multiple carts and they're trying to unify carts, or bring in that ERP data, bring in CRM information, and trying to put it all into a single location. That's where we find it to be most useful and powerful. Not for, again, like you were saying, a single little feature like, oh, I want to have a page that has a video on it. Well, you can do that anywhere. It doesn't have to be headless.
Yeah, to that
I
point, isn't that also what people are calling composable, which is a bunch of different backends rolling into headless?
Yeah, exactly. Like, one of the biggest benefits of composable is the fact that instead of choosing an e-commerce platform that gives you a lot of things out of the box and it's super easy to set up, but at the same time, you have to sacrifice some things. Like some of the things won't be perfectly fine-tuned for your business. And something like that is good for small and medium merchants. But when we are talking about the enterprise tier, when we are talking about really millions going through this every month, then fine-tuning even a very small detail could result in a very, very large return of investment. And this is where composable really shines, because you can really fine-tune your tech stack. You can fine-tune every piece of your tech to support the biggest possible return of investment, which is, let's be honest, like not possible to that degree with monoliths, because you will always have to live with some compromises that are dictated by your vendor. But at the same time, with much bigger flexibility, there comes also much bigger complexity and cost. So, there is probably some threshold.
Yeah, you really need volume to
from
make
which
that
it
work.
makes sense.
You really need volume to make that work. I mean, you need to be Amazon or, one of these huge, e-commerce retailers. But to go back to what Dean was saying, I mean, personally, I don't see how having an ERP connector or a CRM connector at your backend will change anything about needing a headless storefront. Just because, right, whether you have a headless storefront or not, you're probably not going to get data directly from your ERP anyways. That's probably going to be a connector that's at your backend, regardless of the way you're getting your products, the way you're getting your, customer information, et cetera, is probably going to be all the same, unless you're switching the source of truth. And in that case, you're not really using your e-commerce platform as a source of truth anymore.
Yeah,
That's a
that's what
different
I'm talking
story.
about.
And yeah, that's where composable really shines, as Philip said. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
know Isaiah is not sold on the whole composable train, so
Well,
he's
I
going
just
to
think
flame
the
us.
terminology is stupid because let me explain why I think it's stupid. So I think all we're doing is just confusing people, and we just talked about how most people don't really know what headless is. They're going into the wrong decision-making process because they just heard the buzzword and they think it's going to help them. And I think going back to your question, Coco, if you're looking for a feature, like it's hard for me to understand why a feature would justify you going for headless. So yeah.
Well, let's say that I like one of our main features are the different colors that a product has. And each time that the customer chooses a different product, it sends an HTTP request, and then the page has to refresh, and then you get the DOM just the entire DOM tree will refresh entirely. And yeah, so and maybe probably another feature will be filtering.
I mean, that's all stuff that I've been doing for like 10 years, not headless. So like,
okay.
I mean, maybe, yeah, you might get a slightly faster load time if you did it headless, but I mean, I was even building custom, where not just the entire image, parts of the image would change in like 2014. So I that's a perfect example where I think you could just do that without headless, and unless your volume is insanely high, I doubt you would benefit from headless. So we could take this offline, and I'd be happy to show you how to do something like that on like BigCommerce or Shopify or Magento or the million other options. But going back to the question about headless versus composable, I think it just confuses people, and I think it doesn't actually help drive the industry forward. And the reason for that is because we all just Sunrise and Philippe and Lone pretty much all just agreed that the main benefit of headless is composable. And so if the main benefit of headless is composable, and one of the main reasons that you should go headless, having two words for basically the same benefit is just confusing. And so when I think about headless and why our clients or anyone should go headless for the most part, it's usually because they have multiple different sources of truth. So, Lone, I think about some of our clients that they have to have the source of truth in the ERP for pricing, inventory, and certain complex logistical issues. And then they have to have the source of truth for certain content in another system. Maybe it's a PIM, maybe it's a CMS, maybe there's source of truth of e-commerce data in, BigCommerce or another platform. So you start to get into 4 or 5 different sources of truth, sometimes more when you get into apps. Essentially, you're saying the benefit of headless is composable and vice versa, and you're using 2 different words for.
Keep in mind, again, you're not fetching all of that data from the storefront. At this stage, if you have multiple sources of truth for multiple types of data all around, you're going to have a middleware. That's where composable enters the. But I agree, it's confusing to people.
Like,
but
complex.
But there's a difference.
Though. You're just saying, you're adding like another. Like so yes, then of course you need some sort of middleware way to bring up all that data into one front end, right? But why is that not also headless?
Into one API, not one front end, but just confusing again.
I would slightly disagree with you, Isaiah, because I wouldn't limit the benefits of headless to just composability. I mean, it is maybe most obvious one, especially when it comes to the sales. But there's a lot of situations and scenarios where headless would actually be your lifesaver. One of them, for example, is when you have a very old e-commerce platform and you want to modernize it. You want to modernize the experience for your users because making changes literally is almost impossible and everything is super slow. This is where headless could be a great starting point because you can detach your front end. You can modernize it for your users and modernize the rest for yourself later. For example,
makes sense because all you're saying is that you're on an old platform. So why wouldn't you just go to BigCommerce or Shopify?
Because the migration of the whole e-commerce is much, much, much tougher and much more time consuming and much more money consuming than just detaching the front end and modernizing this part. So especially right now, let's say we have economic downturn times. So going into a completely new platform, it's not always something that could be green lighted.
But modernizing an API to work with, though.
Yeah. Of course, like I assume that it is old, but not that old.
I don't see.
Yeah, so this is where this could be a valid use case for headless, even though you're not really going into composable.
So you're saying keep the old back end and just go headless on the front end? I mean, to me, I feel like you're going to end up spending more money doing that than if you just went to like BigCommerce or Shopify or some other more modern system. But maybe I'd have to like obviously understand the exact use case and the problem. But my guess is when you actually looked at all the costs involved and we quoted out both, it would probably not be cheaper. But that's my...
Well, that's something I would argue with, but maybe not here, or maybe we could argue here, because it really depends. First of all, like on the platform, migrating from a very, very old platform usually is super time consuming because you might not even have a ready to use scripts. I mean, while on the other hand, you could have
data transfer is only a small cost of the re-platform usually.
Yeah, but I'm trying to give you examples of like how many things actually could not be there, how many things you would have to do on your own. So in that case, it might be a better choice to just modernize the front end and do the migration of the e-commerce platform later.
I don't know. I'm not buying that. I've never seen that work well, but I guess maybe it's just because that's not what we would have our clients do. But
so we've seen that working very well with Magento 1 to Magento 2 migration, actually. So when I was working in the agency before Levante, we had a lot of cases like that.
Guys, we have a question from James who asks, what is the sweet spot? What does everyone see as the sweet spot for headless? We mentioned budget and complexity, but what else? Well, my answer personally, like a quick rule of thumb answer, is if you start to have dozens and dozens of front-end apps on your BigCommerce or Shopify instance, for example, I've seen many PDPs that are just bloated with apps. That's really when you see a big performance issue usually is because you're relying on so many apps and so many things are just iframed into the PDP and it's insanity all around. you might want to consider just consolidating everything into like just a better custom build front end at this stage. If you, again, if your company is at the right spot to consider that, but that's just my answer. I'd like to hear what everybody thinks.
I think you should be at least at 20 million in online sales. I mean, there's always exceptions, right? There's going to be working with someone that's a large billion-dollar company that's building a large headless marketplace, and it makes sense for them because it's at zero sales right now, but it's like a new business and they can afford to kind of like build something complex and new. But generally, I think, usually if you're not at like 20 million in sales, it's hard to justify online. And even then, I would say like that's the very early starting point where I would start to even consider it. And still then I would say like you should, like, let's say Loan, they have too many apps, like how many of those could be consolidated? Because a lot of times they have 10 apps and they got those apps 3 years ago. And now one of those can actually do the same thing as 4 of the apps that they just migrated.
Yeah,
one of them.
That's true. There's usually some low hanging fruits there. The problem though is with the apps, like what apps are going to work well together, right? The Frankensteining's, like 100 apps together usually doesn't work well. So like there's got to be some proper thoughts, paid to, what apps are you going to use in the context of everything else. And usually, you have a 3-4 year old storefront on just a head full storefront on BigCommerce or Shopify, and usually it's going to be the result of many years of just stacking things on top of each other's. There comes a point where you really have to, take a step back and ask your agency partner to, hey, look at how could we do all of this better? Is there not like a combined solution? I agree with you, Isaiah. Usually there are some low-hanging fruits to tackle there before you go ahead.
Yeah, and if you've exhausted all of that, right, and then you've gone through and you still can't get the apps down far enough,
right,
then it's like, okay, maybe it does make sense to make the transition.
Right. Yeah. Provided you do have the budget to make it happen.
Yeah. The other example is, Loan, if the client is very technical, some of our clients are extremely technical. They have a CTO, they have a development team, and we're essentially augmenting their team, right? We're not actually necessarily doing everything ourselves. We're just kind of an extension of their development team. So in those cases, they may be, funded or have some sort of good reason to have the technology be like a value add to their business because they have their own internal technology team.
And I think you'll find that without proper guidance, a lot of clients will install, 20, 30 apps and then adapt their business to utilize those apps, thinking that's the only way to do something, and then realize that, like, if an agency partner comes in and you go, hey, like 20 of those apps actually aren't needed, right? You could accomplish all those things doing something else. And they may think, going back to Lauren, what you said before about, oh, if they have a lot of apps, maybe they've got a more complex use case, but it turns out they don't need, more than half of those. But they think that they did because in the beginning, without any guidance, they have installed a bunch of things and they're forcing themselves to use them because they're installed. But it turns out you could get rid of half of those. And again, the need from just what you think is more of a complex need could actually be very much simplified because they don't realize you can just accomplish that, right on the platform.
Yeah, I would say that probably the biggest opportunity for most businesses is to just audit every software they have, and they could probably get rid of 30% of their software.
Yeah, I agree.
People don't realize how powerful, for example, BigCommerce is with just promotions. Like, take the promotion engine. A big part of why I love BigCommerce, especially for B2B projects, but not just, right? Also for B2C. You can do so much with built-in promotions on BigCommerce. You don't need an app for 98% of whatever you want to do on it. But a lot of people don't even know that.
Yeah, I think B2B is a place where a lot of, exactly like you said, a lot of people don't realize that there are great existing, again, like in BigCommerce, right? There's the whole B2B edition. And a lot of times that's where one of the first places people reach out to us. They say, hey, we need to bolster our B2B side. So let's go ahead and do this headless build. And we'll say, oh, well, did you, look at the existing B2B capabilities on, your respective platform? And they'll go, what? Like, it can do that? and again, yes, let's do the due diligence. Let's go through and look at the use case, and you'll find out again, you don't need it. Oftentimes, the headless just becomes this kind of, going back to what we said earlier, this de facto buzzword that it's going to solve all my problems. Therefore, I don't have to do the research.
Yeah, I think the problem is people don't really have a good perspective on what the alternative could be, right? So how far could you take? I mean, there are people doing non-headless $100 million on a website, right, on BigCommerce or Shopify, and so that's certainly possible, right? You don't have to go headless to do hundreds of millions of dollars. But I do think, yeah, I think it's also important to figure out what's that tipping point. And it's a hard question. It's so like specific to the use case.
Yeah, I would like to see retailers kind of switch the paradigm when they, go into the headless world. And that's something I will keep on repeating to everybody I speak to about this topic, which is you have to, from the point that you start to do headless and you start to do custom development, and you're in a different world compared to Headful using a bunch of apps and pre-built stuff. You have to start thinking about yourself as a retailer. You have to start thinking about yourself as a tech company first and a retailer second. It's a shift in paradigm, even if you're just building your own custom storefront and everything else is run of the mill. I personally think that you start to become more of a tech company from that point onwards, and it's just going to keep on getting more and more complex further down the road, right? So it makes sense from that point to think of yourself, okay, you have a development team. It might be an agency, you still have a development team. You're building custom stuff. You have to think all of a sudden about features, about bugs. You have to know how the deployment processes work and the rollouts, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, you're a tech company, whether you like it or not. And I wish more retailers had that, realization. And I think, to your point, Isaiah, the retailers above $100 million using perfectly fine, headful standard themes on BigCommerce, that's probably because they probably thought about headless before. That's probably because they know they will have to think about themselves as a tech company, but they don't want to pivot. They don't want to make the switch to that. And I commend them. I agree. I definitely understand, where they're coming from with that. It's a lot of responsibilities all of a
Well,
sudden.
it's about what is your value proposition, right? Like Kylie Cosmetics is a good example of like a site that does insane volume with a relatively simple business model, and the value prop was largely the branding and the persona of the owner, or I think the former owner, because they sold it, right? So if you're going to move into a direction where the technology is more and more of a value prop and a differentiator, I think that can be a huge advantage, but you have to be like very serious and understand what that is to make it a legitimate value prop.
Isaiah, I'm sorry if I say your name wrong.
No, yeah, Isaiah.
So let's say that the company went headless, and the headless is amazing. I have more experience in the front end, and I just want to know your opinion in like how can this improve the back end, or like like what can you gain by having the website headless at the end?
So I mean it's kind of what we've just been talking about. I mean, there's so many different things that it can help. So I would say that the number one thing is having the ability to unify data from multiple different sources, going back to that composable, the composable concept, which is basically rolling up all the data from different backends.
Okay, so let's say that your company is having like they're having a bunch of problems with the source of truth.
Yeah.
So maybe like that can be the answer for the company.
Yes, exactly. So that's where I think there's the most benefit. It's not the only benefit, but yeah, when you have like 5 or 6 different systems that need to be the source of truth, then that can be a lot better for headless, because the front end can all display that data in real time from those 5 or 6 different systems. Whereas the traditional non-headless model, you would have to integrate all that data into one system, which can be very challenging. It might end up actually just being harder to do it in the old model than to just display the data in the front end via headless. I don't know, Lone, you could probably explain that better technically than I can, but
No, that was a great explanation. Definitely, there comes a point where it's just so much complexity to do it headful. Then yeah, it does make sense to go headless, but it depends on so many different variables, and it's definitely on a project by project basis. But without even talking about that, you have to make sure that the company itself is ready for that. Again, everything we said before. team to work with at the company, at the retailer, all of that to make sure that you're ready for the amount of homework that comes with build. Agree with your assessment. It's just on a project by project basis.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, guys. I'm gonna have like one last question, and is when like in your experience, what have you seen that the company have gained by changing to a headless?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I mean, the whole performance spiel is, it's debatable as we say, whether you do it the right way or the wrong way will decide, your fate on that, on performance. But if you do it the right way, performance can be amazing. That's the truth. You can get to a point, if it's built the right way, you can get to a point where indeed what everybody says about performance and how it performs better than Headful is true. Again, if it's built the right way, if you've got the infrastructure to support it, if you deploy, for example, on Vercel, you've got an edge network and everything. You've got the CDN in place, and if your storefront project in itself is lightweight enough, etc., provided you meet all of these criteria, yes, the performance will be amazing and better than Headful. That's the truth. And then you get the flexibility, right? You get the ability to iterate on features in a way that just gives you a little bit more headroom than a Headful build, right? Where if you've got the right setup in place, you've got your team set up, you've got so whether that's an agency or in-house or half, you've got your project management set up in a way that works in sprints, and you're able to just throw features at your team and they get iterated on and shipped in a matter of, let's say, a couple of weeks or a month or a couple of months. You're able to be constantly innovating and constantly shipping features and improvements in a way, again, that's a little bit harder to do when, you can definitely see people innovating slower when they're on normal Headful builds versus,
Yeah,
when
I
they
think
go
that,
fully
that
headless and they
point,
have the control over the code base.
I think that point is really important though, because you have to have the money and capabilities to actually do that.
Preach again.
I mean, I've worked with huge companies that just don't have the processes or the manpower or even the budget to actually have enough people iterating that fast to even get value out of that. You
And
know what I mean?
and that's when it's a mistake. That's when it's a mistake. And that's why I will keep on repeating 99% of retailers don't need headless. And that's exactly where I'm coming from with this statement. Only the 1% do. For the 1%, it makes sense. But you have to ask yourself, am I part of the 1%?
And I don't think you can look at it as being what is the one thing that headless solves for everybody, because that's not correct, right? Each use case, and we've discussed this already, everyone has mentioned that each use case is going to be very specific. And if you're doing it the right way, you're trying to solve something very specific that might not necessarily be speed. It could be something entirely different, but it solves that use case. We had a very large retailer who wanted to unify multiple of their brands, right? They had a lot of very big name brands, and they wanted to have this unified area where you could go purchase things from all these different brands, be in one centralized locations and kind of bounce around. They didn't necessarily have any problems with speed at all. Their specific use case was, how can we unify our brands under this one thing, make it easy for retailers to be able to shop across all these brands, but have it all in one centralized location. So I don't think there's any one specific thing that you can say headless solves this absolutely for everybody in every use case. I don't think that's the right way to look at it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And we've done the same thing with a retailer called BidFTA. So they're a bidding website. So it's kind of like eBay. You can bid on items, but they also have a marketplace feature that's built on BigCommerce. And we built a headless storefront for them on Next.js Commerce to achieve exactly that.
It's
So they would
still a
have
beta,
their
though.
own bidding API, and they would have the BigCommerce marketplace feature all integrated into one UI. So that's definitely, the flexibility you get in terms of building features is unrivaled, because of course you have control over the whole code base.
Alone, just to be clear, the marketplace is live, but the bidding site is still in beta I don't know why.
Is it? I thought it was the other way around. I thought they were waiting to release the marketplace, but
on BigCommerce, but somehow they just haven't. I don't know why they haven't launched.
Okay. Everybody, forget about what I said. Sorry,
well,
divulging client information.
Yeah, it's live beta. Sorry, I just want to make that clear. But like, you can actually go to it.
Yeah, it is public, right? Beta.bitfta.com. It is public.
Yeah.
All right. Good. I'm not in trouble. Great.
Yep.
All right, before any of you guys get in any more trouble, I do just want to give an opportunity to either Alan or Ben, your other two speakers on here. If either of you want to jump in, no pressure, but wanted to give you guys an opportunity to hop in.
I don't have much. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
No, go for it.
Oh, I didn't have anything to say, but I did want to thank the people that did speak today. Like, this was very, very insightful. It's great to hear directly from partners, especially like Lone and Isaiah and Philip, who's not here, and Dean. Like, all of you have really added a lot to this conversation, and I really appreciate it. I know I'm actually the product marketing manager for Headless and developer experience, but I do agree with the sentiment that it's really not right for the majority of the merchants that we see. A lot of them would be a better fit for Headful, and I kind of embrace that mantra too, because I think that we need to be thinking about what's in the best interest of merchants. And I think that a lot of you have really kind of embraced that mindset, not just trying to sell to them and become, get them on a retainer for something that's way more than they need. If it's not the right fit, then I fully support with what you have all said. I think you guys really hit it. So thank you. I appreciate it. Go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to add, and it's just a definitional sort of thing. To me, headless and composable commerce have got sort of like different visions and different purposes that overlap. I think, like in terms of my thinking, like the vision of composable commerce is I should be able to replace my tax engine. I should be able to replace my order management. I should be able to replace local in-store pickup. And you can do a lot of this using current platforms like BigCommerce, with extensions and applications and hook it in. The easier that is, the easier it is to replace parts of it with another part, because you can then get specialty vendors who ship a HQ with shipping capabilities, and they've got these different capabilities and the different skill sets. And to me, the simplicity of swapping it and swapping those systems out, and being able to say, I've got my own order management system, I've got my own product management system, which is the source of truth and so forth, being able to interchange them more easily. To me, that is the vision of composable commerce, at least in my head. The reality is when you get...
Yeah, I kind of want to...
I'll just finish one last little bit. To me, that the challenge is the reality is they frequently change a UI. And if the UI isn't powerful enough to do it, that's where the headless sort of comes into it. From the other aspect of it is that you may have to go headless, and people confuse the two, because to merge all those different systems together may not be feasible with the current platform.
Well, I want to address your point about the composable, because I still am, I'm still a big believer in trying to get rid of the confusion of these two words. I just think composable and headless, they're too much overlapping. It just confuses people. And I think when you say, in theory, in the vision of composables, that, I can easily swap my tax system out, and, but when you go headless or composable, it's going to be harder to swap your tax system out than to change from Avalara to Vertex or whatever if you're on a Headful, Shopify, or BigCommerce platform. Because like if you're not headless, you can just literally uninstall, reinstall the app, and it should work very easily. If you're headless, you're gonna have to like wire it up to the middleware, go through all this development. It's gonna be a lot more work. So I feel like we're misleading people by using these words, because it's not actually easier.
My point was just that I don't think composable commerce is the same concept as headless. Like you were talking about, you can just use one term or the other. I think they're different things.
if they're different things, like, why are we using? I guess I just don't see the value in using these two different words. I think we're not
Yeah.
helping.
I mean, my simple explanation of it is that headless is used to talk about, for example, a storefront that's detached from the backend, whatever that backend may be, right? However, whether it's run-of-the-mill BigCommerce or whether it's a custom middleware that has whatever behind it, or whether it's a fully custom e-commerce platform, right? That if you have a detached storefront, that is headless. But composable on the other end is to describe whatever is on the back end, right? So if you've got a middleware that speaks to a bunch of different data sources, it speaks to your ERP, it speaks to your e-commerce platform, if that's BigCommerce or something else, it speaks to your tax system, etc. And you've got that very modular, and I think modular is the key word here, backend, and we're only talking about the backend here, then that is composable. And you get one API that never changes, or at least, when it does, then you got to update your clients, obviously, in your storefront, etc. But you've got a centralized API that just is the facade for all of that. It's your entry gate into your backend. That to me is composable, and you can swap your tax system, for example, without your API data format changing, and hence without having to make any changes on your storefront. So
Yeah, I
think
just
about
feel like it's not because, okay, so let's just say you did the headless without composable, right? So you have a
Yep.
headless on just BigCommerce, right? Let's use
Right,
that,
yeah.
which actually can be done pretty quickly with the new Next.js, and I think there's that connector and all that, right?
Yep.
If you were to do that, you're probably still going to use the tax system like Avalara. Are you going to use the app? Are you going to install the app into BigCommerce? And then are you going to wire it back up? Like, how are you? Explain to me how you would do that and it wouldn't be composable, or that it would. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, you're gonna use the app because that's a backend app, and it's gonna feed the data into whatever your whatever your cart data is that you get from the BigCommerce API, but you're still using the BigCommerce API as your your interface to talk to BigCommerce from your storefront. And don't forget that with BigCommerce, the checkout is not headless. So you're sending customers back to BigCommerce for the checkout. And obviously, Avalara is going to have the most relevance at the checkout step. So yeah, that's probably a bad example, but I get it though. I get the confusion. I get the
I just don't think we're helping anybody using these two different words. I know I keep saying that over and over because I also think that when we're saying composable, what we're really saying is displaying multiple different sources of truth on one front end, and that
not
is
necessarily on one front end though. That's the thing. If you have multiple storefronts, or if you have you have a storefront and you have a mobile app, for example, then you wouldn't want to fetch data from multiple sources of truth on these two storefronts, right? Because then it becomes difficult to maintain. So then you need a centralized API that will be the same for both storefronts, whether that's your mobile app or your web storefront, or multiple web storefronts, whatever your use case might be, even like in-store kiosk or whatever, And I think that's really where it shines. But again, I think composable, like headless, is already something that I think should be only when you're, as you say, Isaiah. I think the 20 million mark, it is just like a general rule of thumb that makes sense for me in terms of size, where you should be considering headless or starting to consider headless. But I think composable backend architectures should be for the 100 million and up. We're talking about a whole different ball game, in my opinion. It's a conversation that should not be had with many vendors.
Trying to distill it into this one buzzword is just like, I'm not really sure it's helping anyone.
And I think these discussions, if anything, have really shown that, regardless of what it's being called, there's a layer of complexity and understanding that needs to go along with what, utilizing this process. And I think that's the big thing people, need to understand. Oftentimes, I forget who said it earlier, somebody thinks, oh yeah, just go headless, it's easy. It's not. It doesn't make it easier. I mean, this hour-long discussion has already proven, right? It's complex. There's a lot of factors, and I think everything needs to start from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a better use of the word composable would be just to call it enterprise software architecture, because really what you're talking about is large companies that have complex backend needs that need different software, and it's complex architecture. Like literally, that's what we're talking about. And that's why it can't be distilled into one simple buzzword.
Hey, breaking news, breaking news. Anybody who needs composable is probably already composable in some way because they already have a middleware. How about that?
Yeah, and they probably already, they already have an IT department. It's just, we're trying to like simplify something that just can't be simplified because you're talking about massive companies.
All right. Well, when all of you guys were tweeting at me saying that you had hot takes about Headless, I did not take you as seriously as I should. This is an awesome thing. I hate to like slow things down, but we're almost at time. We're at about an hour. And I, first of all, want to say thank you to all of you for all of this. Like, this has been so interesting. I honestly had to do no work. This was great for me. I just got to sit back and listen to all of your opinions. And I hate to admit that like the most fruitful, fun space we've had is the one where I spoke the least, but I will admit, this was awesome. If you're a dev in here and you build on BigCommerce, be sure that you're in our developer Slack space and we can have more of these discussions asynchronously and you don't have to wait for a Twitter space. And if you're not in that, shoot me a DM after this and I can get you the application. And I know a lot of you are in our developer Slack space and you are devs on BigCommerce. If that's the case, we would love if you would take our developer experience survey. I just tweeted out a link to it like an hour ago, so it's like right up at the top of my feed. And we're running it for the next 5 days. And this will be really great. Like, all that feedback's gonna be really great for us to kind of move forward and focusing a lot more on making this the best place for you guys. Ben, you have your hand raised.
I do not have my hand raised.
Oh.
I'm just playing with emojis.
Okay, great. I didn't want to like sign off before you had a chance to say something. And one last thing is that this week's talk was Lone's idea. He came up with this concept for this. So first of all, huge thank you to Lone. Yet another thing I did not need to do for this space was even come up with what we were going to talk about. So if you guys ever have ideas for spaces, if you just have something you kind of want to like, bounce ideas off of the community, if you want to co-host one, I am more than happy. My door is always open. My DMs are always open. Like, please reach out. I would love to do way more of these in the future and talk about things that you guys are really interested in. And with that, we are at an hour. We've never had Twitter space be this long. This was so awesome. So thank you to everyone, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for having us.